when we experience something together somehow, we can then develop common ideas, even if we have if we are coming from very different fields, if we have very different perspectives.
Welcome to the European Alternatives podcast. I'm Marta Cillero Manzano, Communications Director at European Alternatives.
And I'm Segolene Pruvot, Director of European Alternatives. This podcast is inspired by our organization's motto: democracy, equality, culture, beyond the nation state. Each episode is structured to reflect these core values, exploring ideas, stories, and initiatives that challenge conventional borders, both political and cultural, and envision a more inclusive, participatory Europe. We've designed the podcast in this way in order to open spaces for discussion about what stories and ideas are behind democracy, equality, and culture beyond the nation state. Here, we dive into the voices, experiences, and movements that are shaping the Europe we want to see. One where democratic engagement, social equality, cultural diversity, and transnational cooperation aren't just ideals, but active practices. These are more than sections of a conversation. They are guiding lights of our work and reflections, ways of asking, what kind of Europe do we want to live in? I'm joined today by Eva Maria Bertschy, a founding member of Fondazione Studio Rizoma, who co-curated the 3 first editions of Between Land and Sea Festival in Palermo. She also did a number of projects regarding colonies. She works as a dramaturg, director, playwright, and curator at the intersection of theater and political activism in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, and Congo, among others. Hi, Eva. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself a bit more to our listeners?
Hello, my name is Eva Maria Bertschy. I'm working in theater for many years now. I'm also curating, and I lived here in Palermo for the last 5 years, and I'm now actually leaving, but I'm working at the same time on the premiere of my next piece that will be here in Palermo at Teatro Garibaldi in some days.
Can you tell us more about 2 of your projects, The Ghosts Are Returning and Campobello, the latter being the one being premiered in Palermo in December 2025?
I began working in theater together with the director Milo Rau, and I worked with him as a dramaturg for many, many years, and like 10 years. And when I stopped, I then founded a group, an artist group between Switzerland and Congo. It's called Group 50/50. And I collaborated with them in the last 5 years, and we made different projects, but the first was called The Ghosts Are Returning, and it was a music theater project, and we talked about a story that somehow linked Congo and Switzerland. It was the story of a Swiss doctor who was working in Congo during colonial times in the 50s, and he brought 7 skeletons from the so-called Pygmy people, from the Mbuti people who live in the equatorial forest in Congo. He brought them to Switzerland to realize what we would call today like racist research, to do racist research. And we somehow in this group of Congolese and Swiss artists tried to understand what happened in the 50s, but then we also traveled to the equatorial forest to speak with the descendants of these 7 people and to try to understand what they would like to do with these 7 skeletons that are still in the archives of the University of Geneva till today. We created a music theater piece that was at the same time a kind of transnational requiem for these 7 people. And so with a lot of traditional Congolese music, but also with European classical music, and we tried to mix somehow also these 2 musical languages, and we tried to tell the story of our travel to Wamba and the different encounters with the people we had there. And of course, at the same time, it was a kind of activist move to that, because we wanted to somehow make a restitution happen of these 7 human remains. But we didn't succeed for now, but we actually succeeded to make a big push forward to make it happen. The second project I would like to describe is Campobello. It's a project that I'm directing, and but I'm working with Aboubakar Sidibe, a filmmaker originally from Mali, who is living in Berlin, with Daniela Macaluso, a Sicilian actress, and with Kojako Sakamwe, a musician from Congo, and with Lea Burkhalter, who is the scenographer and the costume designer of this project. Campobello tells the story of a small city in Sicily, where every year during the olive harvest, thousands of migrant farm workers gather. And we somehow try to tell the story of this city, like of this encounter between the people living in Campobello and the farm workers who arrive there every year. And we try to tell it through fictional stories, but it's also through our somehow observations, experiences we made when we were doing research in that city last year.
You have a lot of experience in theatre and political activism. For you, how do participatory artistic practices contribute to strengthening democratic engagement today, especially in contexts where democracy feels fragile and contested?
To begin with, I'm not an activist, but I'm a theatre director who is working with activists for many years. So I'm trying to give them a space in theatre to tell their stories, but I'm not myself active, let's say, in the political field. In my practice, I always try to create a space for people to tell their stories, no? And I always try to create a space that is a multilingual space, that is a space where people coming from very different fields, also people coming from different countries could meet and dialogue on different topics. So theater is a very elite space somehow. People who go to the theater are usually from a certain class. The people who are on stage are also from a certain class, and it's not so diverse actually. So I'm always trying to make the practice more diverse, to try to bring people on stage who might not be used to do it, or to collaborate with other artists who maybe from different countries who don't have access to European theatre spaces, or to just find funding to create theatre spaces in other countries, or to finance theatre in other countries. I think coming from a northern country, we sometimes cannot imagine actually what it means when these democratic spaces don't exist, as theatre spaces. So in some countries, we still need to create them, or people still need to create them. They need funding for it, etc. So, and in the north, in our countries, we need to make them more accessible for other people. This is actually what we have to do.
You've worked with many people whose voices are often marginalized, notably working with Milo Rao or Group 50/50. What have these collaborations taught you? How do you ensure that within these collaborations, everyone participates in storytelling and decision-making?
The theater is a very complicated artistic practice that is usually, like, traditionally very hierarchical. So you have a director who is directing things, who is deciding who has to do what exactly in the process. The role of the director is somehow also to give people the space to develop things, to develop their own practice and so on. So in somehow different forms actually of collaboration in all these different projects. I mean, I first worked with the director Milo Rau, who is like, he has a very hierarchical practice somehow. With Group 50/50, we tried a very collective form of collaboration, and even like a transnational collective collaboration, which is very clearly a very complicated practice to develop. And now I somehow, with the present projects, I made a bit of a step back, I have to say, from that very collective practice to be again a director, but who is trying to give much more space to everyone to develop things within the process. But I'm very much like guiding people through that process within my role as a director. For me, what is extremely important is that we do make an experience together somehow. And research is always the base of every collaboration. So when we experience something together somehow, we can then develop common ideas somehow. Even if we are coming from very different fields, if we have very different perspectives. Like for people like Abo, for instance, who never made theater, for him it's also, I mean, we have somehow a common base to develop something together.
Can you give us a practical example of how you navigate issues of equality and inequality within your transnational artistic collaborations? For instance, when the collaborators work in very different political and economic contexts.
Yes, it is very complicated. I mean, with Group 50/50, we really had the ambition somehow to create a space of equality between Congo and Switzerland, between artists from Congo and from Switzerland. We made the experience that it's very complicated actually to create a space where we meet on an equal level when like the structure around is like so radically unequal. So we are constantly, when you try to create more equal structures in a field that is, or in a collaboration that is so radically unequal, you fight with so many complicated things that it's very exhausting somehow. Just we have to be very careful not to idealize a space, for example, that we always acknowledge that these inequalities are there, and that we cannot, not just by saying that they are not there, they will not disappear. I mean, so we have to be very clear with what we're dealing with. We don't have to be afraid.
Do you think artists and cultural institutions should play a role in addressing inequalities? What are the limits? What can art realistically change?
Maybe let's talk also a bit what actually was achieved in the last years. I think that the theatre spaces in Europe, for instance, became much more diverse in the last 10 years, which is very nice. The structures behind are still not so much diverse, let's say, but it's also changing, which is also a good evolution, let's say, we should just stick on that. I mean, we just need more diverse structures everywhere. So even if there are people fighting against that right now, we should just continue to go into that direction. An artistic process in theater, but this is the case probably in every artistic field, is a very complex process. We are very much working with intuition. So when you talk about intuition or aesthetics, there are so many things that we learn from a very early stage in our lives that we take for granted. And it's very complicated to discuss these things with other people who have like very different backgrounds and who learned very different aesthetic. So it's very difficult to discuss aesthetic decisions with people from different backgrounds. So we need somehow to develop a common process on this that is based on intuition, which is actually very complicated, and it needs so much time somehow. And maybe, for example, in my practice now with Kojako Sakamwe, who is the music director of the piece, when it comes to music and text and telling a story together, we just developed a common practice that is based on intuition, that we can just work together without talking about things. And this is kind of what we should reach somehow, and what is also possible to reach in arts.
What does it mean for you to create culture across continents, languages, and lived experiences? How do you ensure that cultural collaboration doesn't slip into cultural appropriation and tokenism? Maybe here you can explain how, in practice, you've done that in Campobello when you work with the migrant agricultural workers who work there.
So I developed, let's say, it's kind of a way of storytelling that is very much based on an encounter or on different encounters. So if I stage the story of someone else, I try to introduce that story by introducing the first encounter with that person. So in a way, I am always trying to be as much transparent as possible in how the story came on stage. Transparency is very much important, so we always have to understand, so who is speaking at what time, with what perspective, and who is telling the story of someone else, why is he legitimate to tell that story in that moment, etc. And I think we don't have to be afraid of telling stories of other people, for example. I mean, this is a bit of a tendency in that moment. I always talk, oh no, but this is like tokenism and so on. Of course, it can be, but if we then only can talk about our own stories, it also becomes a bit boring, I have to say. I don't want to tell my story over and over again. It's not so interesting, but I can tell the stories of the others when I tell somehow the story of our encounter, no? That my perspective is very clearly there, and I can make understand the other perspective also. I would just like to add something about the cultural appropriation question. I think it is very important that we all know that cultural appropriation exists, and that it always existed, that it was a very common colonial practice also, that people, and that's actually where we began with The Ghosts Are Returning. We went to Congo to talk about the people who during colonial times went there, they took objects, they took all sorts of information and whatever, and they tried to tell the story of African countries and regions with their very European perspective. And they didn't really listen to the stories people told them. So they were actually not interested in the stories that African people told them. And so it was, of course, like happening in a context of extreme inequality, but we have to acknowledge that today the context, like the inequality, didn't change so much. We have to be very careful how we tell a story, that we just not frame everything from our perspective actually, and just use the stories of the others to make a point that is actually ours somehow.
You've been working between Congo, Switzerland, Germany, Italy, and beyond. What possibilities does this open for you to work beyond national frameworks?
I think we live in a world where so many people are all the time crossing borders. Borders very clearly exist, and they will anyway continue existing. We live in a world where everybody, or like so many people, are constantly crossing borders. I think that borders will always exist. They will not disappear in the future. But if we somehow strengthen the competences of people in crossing borders, like, for example, if we continue to work in multilingual spaces where people switch from one language to the other, try to make them understand, when we continue to work in spaces where people have very different cultural background and perspectives, then we can somehow ensure that these processes maybe work a bit better, because it's very complicated to cross borders. It's very complicated to try to live in another country, in another context that we don't know, etc. So I think people should just learn better actually to do these things, to travel from one country to another, to understand other people's perspectives. And this is what for me is so important in my practice.
So let me end with the last question. When you think about Europe's future, what alternative visions inspire you most? What kind of Europe can we build together that would be more open, more equal, more democratic?
I worked a lot on Europe's colonial history in the last project, and I more and more understood that there's still so much work to do in terms of just research, education, etc. So we have to understand better actually our colonial history and the impact it has on our present day relationships with people from African countries, from Asian countries, etc. So this is somehow very important. I know that people say that the time for decolonizing our spaces is maybe already over, because we have to talk about other issues, but I think this is something we have to just continue despite all the ideas that are around. I think we have to defend
institutions that are already existing
in Europe, and that create
a bit more equality.
At least
I think that
a bit more equality. I think that we need to recognize what Europe already succeeded, or what we already have in Europe, and that are very strong state institutions. When you go to places in the world where these institutions do not exist, you understand well how good it is to have them. So we have to defend this. We have to even make it work better every day. So I hope that we will continue to work on that, and that we can also help other states to build.
Thank you very much, Eva Maria. That's the end of today's episode. Thanks to you and to Fondazione Studio Rizoma for collaborating on this conversation. We'll be back soon with a new guest and another conversations to keep weaving together democracy, equality, culture beyond the nation state. Until then, take care and goodbye.
As we've heard today, democracy, equality, and culture beyond the nation state aren't just a theme or motto of YEA. They are ongoing practices, constantly reimagined through collaboration, creativity, and connections. And to our listeners, we hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to think about what it means to participate in shaping European future, not as something distant, but as something we co-create every day. If you'd like to learn more about European alternatives, our projects, and our upcoming events and activities, please visit our website euroalter.com and follow us on social media and on this podcast. I'm Marta Figuero Manzano. This has been the European Alternative Podcast. Thank you for listening and see you in the next one.